So up next we have Jeremy Flores.
All right, hi. I wander when I talk, so we're gonna deal with it. Before we begin, I do have a content warning. This is a pretty heavy talk. I hope you will go with me on this journey, but we're going to talk about debilitating illness. We are going to talk about death, and we're going to talk about the emotions that surround those events. And it's okay if that's not for you. It's okay to step out if you need to. It's okay to distract yourself by looking at your phone or scribbling in a journal. You won't offend me. It's okay to take a step out and breathe and decide to come back. We'll be happy to have you. So do what you need to do to take care of yourself. Hi. I want to start with a tremendous thank you to the organizers. I run conferences back in the States, and it is a tremendous amount of work. For a first effort, for any effort, this is outstanding. So please, can we have an uproarious round of applause for the organizers? That's enough. That's enough. And thank you for staying through the end of the day and for coming. The Ruby community continues to be a source of inspiration for me. We'll talk about that in a little bit. You're all wonderful. And finally, thank you to Bryn, sitting there in the audience, for coming on this journey with me and for letting me be a part of her life and a part of the relationship between her and Barbara, which is what this talk is about. So I took this photo. It's a very nice photo. I took it in July when Bryn and I were in Bermuda, laying Barbara to rest. One of her final wishes was to have her ashes spread in Bermuda. Barbara is Brenna's grandmother. We'll talk all about that. But really, I'm here to tell you a story. It's a story about my family. It's a story about how we got there to Bermuda. It's a story about making things that matter. It's a story about my family, and it's a story about fighting when you know you're going to lose. It's a story about this. This is a $5 computer. We'll come back to it. So hey, I have an agenda because otherwise I'll wander. First, we're going to meet some people. Then we're going to talk about emotions like loneliness and guilt. And we're going to talk about those specifically through the lens of providing end-of-life care for someone you love. We're going to talk about how you can't fix everything, no matter how much you want to. We're going to talk about how to know what to build when there is something to build. And then how to measure the impact of what you build. And finally, we'll close with some thoughts on what to do when you invariably lose that fight. So hey, let's meet some people. There's 3 folks central to our story. They're all very nice. There's me, of course, but I am by far the least important people in this story. What I really need to tell you about are Brenna and Barbara. So I'm Jeremy. As you know, I'm a programmer. I'm a teacher. I live and work in Seattle. I really like tattoos and records and food. I run a little conference you've never heard of called Open Source and Feelings. Exactly what it says on the tin. But hey, this is who's important. This is Brenna. She's a software engineer specializing in build and delivery engineering. She's a crafter, she's a runner, she's a gamer, and she's the kindest person I've ever known. She's also my girlfriend. My partner, my best friend. We've been together for 4 years, and she's here with me in Wellington today, and I'm thrilled about that. This is Barbara. This is Bryn's grandmother. She passed away in May of this year, but she remains the central character of our story. And it felt so weird to me to be the one telling this story because it is really Brenna's story to tell. I'm the outside voice, the outside observer. So I sat down with Bryn and tried to give her an opportunity to tell us why Barbara was so special. And this is what she had to say. She was an amazingly strong woman. I put subtitles. She was an amazingly intelligent woman. Oh, it's down here too. And she was independent, headstrong. And, yeah, she was a badass. How many people would describe their grandmother as a badass? I see a couple hands in this suddenly very dark room. Okay, so let's talk about what made Barbara a badass, because I agree. Like, Barbara was a badass. So, she was born and raised in the eastern United States, and on the playground, she spent most of her days. I had to. So, Barbara immigrated from New Jersey to the island of Bermuda. Has anybody been to Bermuda? It's beautiful. In the early 1960s, after a bitter divorce. She immigrated to get a fresh start, and most importantly, she immigrated to have the opportunity of a career, which is something that her ex-husband adamantly opposed. Until her retirement in 1991, Barbara lived in Bermuda, working in the baking and resort industries, and even at one point holding the title of manageress. She was joined in Bermuda a few years after immigrating by her daughter, and some years after that, Brenna entered the picture. Brenna describes Barbara as her role model, as her second mom and tireless cheerleader. She instilled in Bren the belief that success and empathy are not exclusive concepts, that she could achieve anything so long as she worked hard, she studied, she persevered. And it was Barbara's career of working with computers in the banking industry and managing teams of men that inspired Bren to pursue engineering herself. So Bren immigrated to the United States, eventually landing in Seattle, which worked out really well for me. And after retiring, Barbara followed. As she aged, Barbara needed a little help with day-to-day life, and Bren was eager to help her. So in 2012, Barbara moved to Seattle too. And Bren helped her settle into an assisted living facility and established a routine of daily phone calls and visits. You know, hey, grandmom, how you doing? Did you take your meds? All that good stuff. What strikes me is this story of these amazingly strong women, these independent souls who followed each other across oceans, across continents, across decades, helping each other as the situation demanded. Each determined to be there for the other. On December 12th, 2012, Barbara suffered a series of ischemic strokes. That's when a blood clot somewhere else in your body, usually your leg, separates and travels the circulatory system, eventually lodging in your brain. The result was a complete loss of her ability to speak, a complete loss of sensation and mobility on the right-hand side of her body, taking this person who needed a little help but was otherwise an independent, vivacious woman and leaving her bedbound, unable to speak, essentially overnight. It was devastating. Although she could sit in a wheelchair, she didn't have the coordination or strength after the stroke to move it on her own, so she spent most of her time in bed. Her gift of gab, that constant support that Bren had grown up with, cruelly taken from her in just a moment. After the stroke, Barbara needed 24-hour care, so Brenna arranged for her to enter a long-term nursing facility where she lived for the next 4.5 years. Visits were hard, and Brenna visited a lot, usually every day. Some days, Grandmom's body was in full cooperation, and they could have conversations and connect with each other. More often, Barbara was very frustrated by her inability to speak at this severed connection between brain and body. But they made it work. They watched TV and listened to music, and Bren talked about work and life. Some visits were very bad. Barbara would wake up confused, not knowing where she was or why she was there. Having forgotten the stroke and the source of her condition, she was angry, terrified. And Bryn would have the unfortunate job of telling her, again, what had happened to her, reliving. Sorry. Bryn says it was like picking a scab. You know, it never got easier. So Bryn visited multiple times per week for years. When I entered the picture, and Bryn and I got to meet Grandmom, and I started visiting, usually visited once a week for an hour, maybe two. And as happens, a pattern emerged. Oh yeah, I already advanced the slide. I make really good coffee. Really good coffee. You want to be my friend, you want to come over for brunch, you want to have coffee because I make good coffee and Bryn is an accomplished baker. Those are blueberry scones. My coffee is amazing and the scones just blow them away. Like So we would make coffee, we'd make scones, we'd put it in Grandmom's special china that we rescued from storage and we'd go visit. And we'd snack and talk. We'd talk about the weather, we'd talk about work, we talk about friends, we talk about anything we could to hopefully have a little bit of connection with her, to bring her back into our lives just a little bit, help her feel like a person. Eventually, we'd pull out our phones. I was going to mime holding a phone while I was literally holding a phone. Eventually, we'd pull out our phones to show her pictures. Right? It was like there was some other way we could connect her to our daily life. These things are amazing. You take pictures with them. And we tell her the story about our photos. We got in the habit of like taking more pictures than we normally would so we'd have something to show her. After about an hour, we'd pack up, clean up, and say our goodbyes. And we'd go. In doing research for this talk, I came across a lot of stories like Brenna's and Barbara's. In an article from the New England Journal of Medicine, Dr. Ranjana Srivastava recounts what it was like watching a friend and colleague go through this. A friend who worked at the same hospital suffered a stroke similar to Barbara's, and the Dr. Srivastava started journaling. He journaled objectively the medical information about what was happening to his friend's body as it was slowly shutting down. But he also journaled subjectively what it was like to visit his friend and watch him die. This really stuck out to me. I think this is a very human response, right? Or maybe it's just me. But you're there. You know you need to be there. You know you really want to reach this person that you love, but you don't know what to do, so you pull out your phone and check Twitter. Anybody else? Just me? Yeah. Here's another one. It seems unkind to leave, but painful to stay. And this is talking about visiting this person that he cared about. That conflict never goes away, right? It never gets easier to visit. In fact, it only gets harder. Because strokes are cruel. They are cruel to the person who suffers the stroke, of course, but they are also cruel to the people surrounding them. They impose upon our loved ones an impossible burden. I want to talk about that burden. It's an emotional one. On Barbara's side, her daily life was monotonous, low connection to anybody, some dementia, short-term memory problems, left her in a haze most days. I witnessed this really annoying thing where people would talk about her but not to her. That was hard. She's a person. But there was this total lack of control, this lack of agency. What I didn't expect was that on Bryn's side was a similar feeling of powerlessness, of isolation, of a lack of agency. This unshakable feeling that she could never do enough, or feeling bored or frustrated while visiting, and then later hating herself for feeling that way. And this is on top of how hard it is to just care for somebody, to be financially and medically responsible for the well-being of the woman who raised you. Again, lack of control, feeling isolated. Loneliness kills us, and it's not an exaggeration. Dr. Liat Grenak who is a health psychologist who's devoted their career to studying the physiological effects of grief and loss. Wrote an article in the Huffington Post, that bit.ly link will take you there, and in that article, Dr. Granek recounts 40 years of research done on this phenomenon of the physiological impact of grief. It's called Loneliness and Social Isolation as Risk Factors for Mortality, and it was published in Perspectives in Psychological Science, March 2015. I recommend the Huffington Post article because academic journals are expensive and that's bullshit, but it's the way it is. And so across these studies, this huge number of studies, controlling for confounding factors, and how often do you get to say confounding? Controlling for confounding factors, Dr. Granek found that measured social isolation corresponds to an average of 26 to 32% increase in the likelihood of mortality for participants over the study's observation. Put back into like Jeremy terms, it means you're about a third more likely to die if you're lonely, for whatever reason. 3 remarkable things about these studies. One I've already mentioned was the scope, 70 scientific publications, 3 million participants. 2 is that it affects young people more, but this study defines anyone as under the age of 65 as young. This is the real one though. This is the kicker. This takes it home. We found no differences between measures of objective and subjective social isolation. What's that mean? That means feeling lonely, even if you're not scientifically measured as lonely. I have no idea how you do that. But feeling lonely, feeling isolated, is when you experience the confounding efforts, increased likelihood of mortality. Loneliness and isolation will kill you. This is frustrating. Bryn fretted being away from her, like yes, medical stuff, yes, but mostly her being alone so often and so isolated. Grandmom struggled to get throughout the day, and our visits took on this oppressive feeling. It was a purgatory, and we were all waiting for the inevitable. But what can I do, right? I can't fix this. If I could fix this, they'd probably give me a Nobel Prize or a pony made of gold or something. I can't fix it. And that's frustrating. I'm an engineer. That's what I do. But I got to thinking, maybe I can soothe it, right? It's like when you get burned on a hot stove. You can't do anything about it. You're burned. But you can soothe it, right? You can make it easier to bear the healing. I thought about this a long time, and then I had an observation. It wasn't an idea yet, but it became an idea. So follow me. It starts like this. I'm at lunch. So I'm having a taco. I'm at lunch. Stay with me. And it's a good taco. It's a great taco. Haven't had a great taco here yet, but I think it's out there. I want to tell Brenna about this great taco. She deserves to know about this taco. She'll be mad at me if I don't tell her about this great taco. So what do? What do? I pull out my phone, right? I take a picture. I send a text message. Like magic, it's gone. And then Brenna responds, letting me know that she is with me on this journey of a great taco. That's 2017. That's how we do it. This is my family. This is us. We text. We don't Facebook, thankfully. We will not call each other on the phone. Like the fact that this makes phone calls is incidental at best. We text. So like, what if Barbara could text? What if she could just get our text? And that was it. That was the idea. There it was. What if Grandmom could get our text? What if I could tag her into a conversation just like I would Bren or anyone else in the family? The right thing in this case was a system that would let her do that. What if we could spread our messages of affirmation and our attempts at connection and these photos that we share on the weekend all the time that we're not there? My mind raced with possibilities because I'm an engineer, right? And this is where I'm going to bike shed. My first thought was, I'll build this with Elixir Phoenix so it can handle 1,000,000 billion concurrent connections because we have a really big family. There's like me and Bren's brother, and that's probably it. I was like, no, I'll build it with Electron and maybe React. That's a thing that kids use. That way it can like compile for whatever platform. We can install it on our toaster. I'll build a laser, right? I'll build a laser and I will carve my taco text into the face of the moon. Then she'll see them. All right. Bolstered by these thoughts, I knew what to do. I turned to you, the Ruby community. I turned to conference presentations like this one. I turned to blog posts. I turned to my friends that I've made through the community over the years and asked them, what do I do? This is what they said. John Hyland is an engineer at New Relic in Portland, Oregon. And I hear him in my head pretty often. He always says this. Be awesome by being boring. That's what he means. Use established tools, things you know well. Things that have solved all the boring problems so you can focus on creating value for your users. Value for your users. Who's heard that before, right? Man, it meant something this time. I knew who my user was. He also says this. And I agree. And so it made a lot of sense to me. I'm going to use my grandpa's framework to build something for my girlfriend's grandma, right? Like, what he means, though, is that Rails is well understood. All the edges are rounded. It's reliable. It's well documented. It's feature complete. It's a good choice for new projects. It's okay. That's cool. I'm really good at Ruby, really good at Ruby. And choosing Rails as a framework informed a lot of choices, or informed a lot of the rest of the project for me. I now knew I was probably dealing with some RESTful architecture in terms of handling messages between systems. I knew I was probably dealing with something that was web connected, if not web based. And it informed an interface layer for me, right? Like if I'm using Rails, I can probably use a browser to house a lot of this stuff. Okay. This was the next step. I didn't know anything about text messages. I had no idea how they worked. But I remembered that I met Greg at Steel City Ruby in 20-something. And he was given a talk about developers and depression. He works at Twilio, which is a company that specializes in telecom integrations, and he has a great blog where he talks about how smart his dog is. So this started with him not wanting to get up out of bed to turn off the lamp at night. So he taught the dog to do it. Step out a switch on the floor, get a treat. That's a cool project. So you extend that by like using that interface get the dogs to do other things. Like, so what if I hooked a camera to an Arduino and put it in a box next that dispenses a treat when you step on the button? Now the dog is texting selfies. So I figure if Greg can teach a dog to text, he can probably teach me. It turns out that SMS and MMS are just data formats. They have a standard, right? They have something that you can read and understand. I didn't even have to do that because Twilio just gave me an API endpoint to hit, and that was even better. So this is good. I know what to build. I'm going to be boring, which means I'm going to use tools that I understand. I'm going to focus on my users. MMS is just another data format, and if I figured out XML and JSON, I can figure out MMS. But there's a third piece of this. There's something that's missing, and I was having a hard time figuring out what it was. Eventually, I realized I was having a hard time separating my feelings from the project. Right? I kept going back to the fact that Barbara was laying in bed alone while I'm fretting away about texting dogs. That means getting the experience right. It was time to shift the focus back to Barbara and make sure what I was building was actually going to help her, or at least had the potential to help her. So I did a user study. I did a user study. Here's what I discovered. Barbara had some challenges. She had extremely limited mobility. She had some movement in the left side of her body, including her left hand, but not a lot of manual dexterity. Handling a phone was kind of out of the question. Short-term memory impairments essentially made learning curves impossibly steep. She was disconnected from the world around her. It was hard to engage or get her to engage with folks. She engaged with Brenna really well, but Brenna couldn't always be there. And she had a difficulty in speaking that immediately ruled out any voice-based solutions. I thought Alexa, Siri, that might be kind of cool. Nah. Turns out there's a whole community of people that those projects will never serve. Okay, so that's a downer. What did she have going for her? What did Barbara have going for her? She had excellent eyesight, much better than mine. That's why I keep doing this, because I can't see anymore. Excellent eyesight. And she loved looking at the photos. That was a surefire way to engage with her. And she hated network television. And that is important because what I intended to do was replace her television, or really enhance her television. I was going to give it a new power with one of these. Who knows what this is? Yeah? It's a Raspberry Pi Zero. It's a $5 computer. It's a tiny computer. It's right over there. It's got 1 gigahertz single core processor, 512 megs of RAM, 2 micro USB ports, and a mini HDMI. The new ones, the Model Bs, have Bluetooth, BLE, and Wi-Fi right on the board. Amazing, $5. $5, the cost of a coffee. More powerful than the laptop I took to college. Sorry, Mom. So this was the linchpin of my plan. Using it, plus what I'd learned from Greg and John Hyland, I intended to replace her television with a self-updating, constantly connected message streaming service. Would you like to know how it worked? Yes, thank you. I made a service diagram. It starts down here with my phone. I take my taco text. I send it as an MMS to Twilio. Twilio gives me a phone number. I save that into my phone as Barbara. Twilio knows how to munge that MMS into something my Rails service will understand, so it sends it over as a post request to my web server, which is running in DigitalOcean's cloud. And my web server has a series of connected clients via WebSockets. WebSockets are beautiful. They're amazing, right? All of those clients are running on a Pi Zero, which is connected via HDMI to the screen. Data goes all the way around. What's really cool, at least I thought it was really cool, is that WebSockets stay open. So when I got a message and it resolved in the receiving client, I could tell myself. So I'd send a message back over the WebSocket. We're following the red line and then the pink. Is that pink or purple? Purple. We follow the purple. This is audience participation. We follow the purple line back. So the Pi would tell the web server that he got the message, who would tell Twilio that he got the message, who would tell my phone that he got the message. It was like a conversation at that point. And I used HTTP status codes because of course I did. All right, let's see it for realsies. This is the actual screen that was in her room until she passed away. There's some UI decisions that we're going to talk about a little bit, but just to frame it for you, on the left is an MMS photo, like a selfie, a very handsome couple taken with a phone on the Oregon coast. And we went to an arcade, so that's the text that Bryn typed and hit send, and this is how it shows up on her screen. Okay, let's do this. This one will work. Yes. So the iOS Messages app, you can see I've got her saved in my phone as Barbara. There is nothing special about this app. This isn't anything I made. This is just messages. And as I slowly type her a note, you can see the screen changing in the background. We'll talk about that in a second. I was at Seagull, that's a Seattle Linux conference earlier this month, so I just reused the video. I'm sorry. And then we hit send. Whoop. That's the sound it makes. Whoop, right? And then a few seconds later, I get 200 OK. Let me wait. Dramatic pause. Right? OK. You don't have to clap. That's really nothing special. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of this presentation, is that it's nothing special, right? But it is real, right? That was not faked on my local network. That went out to Twilio, over to DigitalOcean. eventually through my Wi-Fi over the WebSocket and all the way back around. You saw it was pretty quick, right? So let's talk about what we're seeing. Like that was a text message, but I always wanted to show her a picture. So the system knows who sent the message and shows the appropriate photo. So it knew how to handle SMS, which has no images, no data attached, MMS, which does, and if that MMS contained a photo, it could handle tall, wide, or square, because I really like taking square photos. I think they look fancy. And that was responsive layout, because I was being boring. HTML, CSS, JavaScript, that's my jam. Responsive layout. And that's pretty much it. I want to go back to those limitations we mentioned, because there's a specific soothing for each one of those. We talked about Barbara's limited mobility. Now this is a wholly automated system. It's passive consumption. For you or I or most able-bodied people, it would not be a very engaging device, but giving her abilities, her specific cognitive and physical abilities, it was a good solution. She had a memory impairment, which means that we needed to show her messages multiple times. So there's a stack, right? It's really a queue. When a new message comes in, we drop it on the queue. We cycle through. We experimented with how deep that queue should be and how long a message should stay, originally arriving at about 40 messages at about a minute apiece. As I said, these photos were a great way to engage with her, and we saw an uptick in her cognitive ability. That might be confirmation bias, I'll never really know, but it felt like she was more engaged, she was more present, she was definitely excited by it. And even though she had difficulty speaking, when she would see something on the screen she wanted to talk about, she could let us know. She could gesture at it. She could read better than she could listen a lot of the time. So it became a way to like give her important information, like, hey, happy birthday. Some other cool tech stuff, because I am a developer and I want to show off. It was smart enough to reject randos. I had this real fear of some jerk sending mean messages to my girlfriend's grandmother, because the internet. So at the Twilio layer, it knew who authorized senders were and who wasn't, and also at the web service layer, it was all over SSL. There was a key exchange. It was pretty. It wasn't super smart, but smart enough. WebSockets work amazingly well in Rails 5, like amazingly well. I was really blown away. You get like the channels object on the Rails side, and then a corresponding JavaScript object to work with, and it just worked really great. I learned how to HTTP2. I did take this opportunity to learn a little something, put Puma behind Nginx with reverse proxy, and upgrading to HTTP2 is literally typing HTTP2 in your Nginx config, which if you'd like to check that out, I put all the configuration, including the Nginx config, in the GitHub repo that's on most of the slides. It's not on this one for some reason. The WebSocket connection with my user base of 1 was surprisingly stable. I was getting some dropped connections, and I couldn't figure out why, and it turned out her DHCP lease was expiring. So to solve that, I built in a cron job to restart the Pi once a week. And then Chrome opened and logged, or when the Pi started up, Chrome opened and connected, and there it was again, fresh WebSocket. But really, it was about the interface tuned to her capabilities, and Brenna was a huge part of this. She ran these user studies where we would take text at different sizes, at different distances, and ask her to read it. And she had no idea what we were doing, but it helped us figure out what she could really comprehend and tune the interface to those. Contrast turned out to be a big deal with that too. So yeah, this was all right, I think. I think this was all right, but how would I know? Like this little system, this $5 computer, this $1 phone number from Twilio, and this little Rails API changed our lives. It made it better. It didn't cure her, you know. It didn't slow down what was happening, but it gave her a little peace. Being able to send her a message like that kept her in the forefront of our minds too. It kept her in the conversation. We shared trip photos, cute pet photos, funny things we saw on the bus, like just whatever we could think of. The things we would normally share with the people we loved, we now had an outlet that we didn't have before. Bryn worried less about her emotional state, about her mental state, and no matter where we were, she could reach out. The real magic happened when we visited. In her pre-stroke life, Barbara loved little notes. You'd find little notes everywhere, right? Tucked into your wallet, you get a thank you card for calling her. Like, she loved little notes, she loved photos. And so seeing those messages like really brought her to life. This is the first photo we took when I set the system up. It was a holiday gift, but she got it in January because it's software, right? And so in setting it up and unboxing it and putting it together, she didn't know what we were doing. Maybe it was a new TV or something. And it didn't really click with her until we took this photo, right? I'm holding the camera out, we take the selfie, and it showed up on the screen just 5 seconds later. And she was really excited. And that excitement stayed with her. And this is dark, but the nature of her dementia and the memory loss meant that she got to experience that little spark of, hey, someone's thinking about me, several times, every time that photo came up. In these situations, man, you take your wins where you can get them, because they are few and far between. This was such a massive improvement over her default experience. I don't know what healthcare is like in New Zealand. In the United States, it's rough, and palliative care is especially rough. And that is not the fault of the people doing that work. Those nurses and care professionals work their asses off for almost nothing. It is thankless, tiring work, but the system is stacked against them, and unfortunately, too many residents spend their days staring at a television, watching network news. Grandma was no exception. On the days where she had the capacity, she would ask the staff to please turn off that noise. But most days she couldn't, and so she got subjected to 10 or 12 hours of Fox News, and that was all day, every day. So this was something. This was better. This was better than Fox News. That is a low bar, right? But I was right over it. In May of this year, Barbara suffered another series of strokes. We were with her when those strokes happened, and we were with her when she passed about a week later. She left behind a legacy of grit and kindness and determination, all of which manifest in her granddaughter. So what do we do now? Now that she's gone, there's no need for any of this. This code is deprecated. Except maybe as a learning tool. Except maybe as a motivational tool. So I'd like to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Not everything needs to be a product. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. There is no ethical consumption under capitalism. I practice that so much. But we all got to eat, right? So that said, if this is a system we have, please, if nothing else, spend a little less time thinking about whether your idea, your side project, can be a product. I'll admit, I was surprised I couldn't find a product to do this thing. The best I found were some Wi-Fi enabled photo frames, digital photo frames, that required me to be on the same Wi-Fi. Not workable. But if I had focused on making a product instead of writing a love letter to my girlfriend, essentially, I never would have shipped it. And even if I had shipped something, it would not have been what she needed. It would have been what I thought could be productized. When I tell people about this project, a very common response is, oh, you should kickstart that. I'm like, kickstart what? Like being nice to your grandma? Because it's not a product, it was never meant to be. It existed to enrich the life of one family. and it did that really well. Maybe it can have a second life in venues like this. Solve problems for the people you love. We are uniquely positioned in time and space. Think about the variables that brought us together in this room to address inequities and injustices in our world. Some of us in here will solve enormous population-threatening problems, I have no doubt. Most of us will create financial value and stability for others, and there's honor in that. I fear that not enough of us will use these skills and these perspectives we have to soothe, if not solve, problems for people we care about. I guarantee you that someone you love right now is in a situation that you can help improve, maybe with code, hopefully with code. So go solve it. Write them a love letter in whatever language you like. Deliver it as a binary on whatever platform brings you joy. Just go seek that connection. And finally, do what you can to protect the basic humanity of others. The nursing staff at Grandmom's home were amazing. I didn't really have a way to talk about them in this presentation, but it's worth bringing up. They do a hard job, and they give so much of themselves in an attempt to protect the basic essence of human rights and human feelings in these otherwise terrible situations. Most of us at some point will face adversity and complications that leave us powerless, that rob us of our agency, and some of us will be exploited. Do whatever you can to give others a sense of relevance and of independence. Go forth, be awesome, do good things, and thank you for having me.